I can barely bring myself to say this out loud, but at my husband's funeral, as I stood there, utterly broken, a message popped up on my phone. It read, "I am still alive, trust no one." Can you even begin to imagine the ice that shot through my veins? My husband, David, supposedly dead, gone forever, and then, that. It's been weeks, and I still don't know who sent it, or why, or what it even means. Was I wrong for even considering it could be true, when I saw him with my own eyes in that casket? Tell me, if you were me, how would you have reacted? How could I possibly trust anyone when that one message shattered my entire reality? Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, just a little over 2 months ago. David and I had what I thought was a perfect life. We'd been married for 7 years, together for 10. We met in college, two awkward art history majors who somehow found each other amidst the chaos of campus life. He was quiet, introspective, with a dry wit that always caught me off guard and made me laugh until my sides hurt. I was more outgoing, but he grounded me, and I felt like we balanced each other perfectly. We had a cozy little house in a quiet suburb, 2 ridiculously spoiled cats, and a shared dream of one day opening a small art gallery together. He worked as an archivist at a local museum, and I taught art classes to kids. Our lives were, for lack of a better word, serene. We had our disagreements, of course, every couple does, but they were always minor, resolved with a cup of tea and a heartfelt apology. There was never any doubt in my mind that David loved me deeply, and I him. Our future felt solid, predictable, and wonderfully ordinary. Then came the phone call, the one that tore my world apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I was just finishing up with my last class for the day, the one with the particularly energetic 6-year-olds who loved to paint with their fingers. My phone rang, and it was David's sister, Sarah. Her voice was thin, reedy, barely audible through her sobs. "Amelia," she choked out, "it's David. There's been an accident." The words hit me like a physical blow. Accident? What kind of accident? My mind raced through 1,000 terrible possibilities, none of them good. I pushed her for details, but she could only manage fragmented sentences about a car crash, a drunk driver, and the hospital. I dropped everything, leaving my art supplies scattered, and drove to the hospital in a daze. The drive felt like an eternity, every street light a cruel mockery of the normalcy I had just inhabited. When I arrived, the waiting room was a blur of concerned faces, none of them familiar. Sarah was there, her face blotchy with tears, along with David's parents, who looked like they'd aged 20 years in an hour. The doctor delivered the news with a somber, practiced tone, but his words barely registered. David was gone. He died on impact. My David, my quiet, witty, loving David, just gone. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. I kept waiting for someone to say it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that he was just injured, that he'd walk through the doors any minute. But he never did. The days that followed were a blur of grief. Planning a funeral, making arrangements, accepting condolences from people whose faces I barely recognized. Every touch, every word of sympathy felt like a fresh stab. His parents were devastated, Sarah was inconsolable, and I was just empty. I felt like a ghost moving through my own life. I ate because I was told to, I slept because exhaustion claimed me, but I felt nothing. The house, once filled with his quiet presence, his books, his art, his scent, now felt cavernous and cold. I spent hours just sitting in his study, tracing the spines of his books, touching his favorite armchair, desperately trying to conjure him back. My friends tried to help, bringing food, offering hugs, but their words of comfort felt hollow. How could anyone understand the depth of this pain? The future we had planned, the gallery, the mundane joys of everyday life, all of it had vanished in an instant. The world felt wrong without him in it. The funeral itself was a foggy memory of black clothes, hushed voices, and the heavy scent of lilies. I stood by the graveside, clutching a single white rose, the cold wind whipping around me. My eyes were raw from crying, but no more tears would come. I felt like I was watching myself from above, a detached observer of my own tragedy. Sarah held my arm, her own grief a palpable weight beside mine. As the casket was lowered, a final, guttural sob escaped me, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. It was at that precise moment, as the first handful of earth was thrown onto his coffin, that my phone vibrated in my pocket. I barely noticed it at first, my mind too consumed by the finality of what was happening. But then it vibrated again, insistent. I pulled it out, almost automatically, my thumb brushing the screen. And there it was. A text message from an unknown number. I am still alive. Trust no one. My heart stopped. My breath hitched. I reread it, then reread it again, convinced I was hallucinating, that grief had finally pushed me over the edge. But the words were clear, stark, impossible. My husband, David, supposedly dead. And this message. It felt like a cruel joke, a malicious prank. But who would do such a thing? Who would be so utterly depraved? I looked around frantically, my eyes darting from face to face in the crowd. Sarah, David's parents, our friends, his colleagues, everyone looked genuinely heartbroken. There was no flicker of amusement, no hidden smirk. Just profound sorrow. Could someone have planted his phone, or sent it from a burner? But the message, "Trust no one," echoed in my head. It implied a conspiracy, something far more sinister than a cruel prank. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my hand trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't tell anyone. Not now, not here. What would I even say? Excuse me, but my dead husband just texted me from beyond the grave. They would think I was insane, driven mad by grief. I had to pretend I hadn't seen it, to keep my composure. But inside, a frantic, desperate hope began to stir, mingled with a terror so profound it made me feel physically ill. The days after the funeral were even harder than before. The world was still broken, but now it was also steeped in a chilling mystery. I replayed the message over and over in my mind. I am still alive. Trust no one. If David was alive, why was he hiding? And from whom? And why did he make me believe he was dead? My grief was now mixed with a confusing cocktail of anger, hope, and paranoia. I checked the number the text came from. It was untraceable, a burner phone, just as I suspected. I tried calling it back, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted back, a flurry of desperate questions. David? Is that really you? Where are you? What's going on? No response. Nothing. Just the eerie silence of a dead line. I started looking at everyone differently. Every sympathetic glance, every comforting hug, felt tainted with suspicion. Sarah, who had always been so open with me, now seemed to hold something back. His parents, usually so transparent in their love for David, now had a haunted look in their eyes that I couldn't decipher. Was I imagining things? Was this grief twisting my perception, making me see shadows where there were none? I felt utterly alone, trapped in this horrifying secret. I couldn't confide in my friends because they'd think I was losing it. I couldn't confide in David's family because the message explicitly told me to trust no one. And what if one of them was involved? What if they knew David was alive and were part of some elaborate, twisted charade? The thought made my stomach churn. I began to subtly investigate. I revisited the accident site, a quiet stretch of highway, perfectly straight. The official report said a drunk driver swerved, hitting David's car head-on. But something felt off. There were no skid marks, no debris scattered far and wide as you'd expect from a high-speed collision. It was almost too clean. I went to the police station, claiming I just needed closure, asking to see the accident photos. The officer, a kind but weary man, showed me the grim images. David's car was completely totaled, crushed beyond recognition. And yet, the message. It clung to me, a persistent whisper of defiance against the cold, hard facts. I even tried to get a look at David's medical records, but as his widow, I was met with bureaucratic obstacles. Everything felt designed to keep me from the truth. I started noticing small things around the house, things that had been overlooked in the initial wave of grief. A book on his nightstand, not one I recognized, with a bookmark halfway through. He was a creature of habit with his reading. He always finished one book before starting another. This one felt foreign. And then there was his laptop. I'd seen it at the house after the accident, but I hadn't touched it. Now, driven by a desperate need for answers, I turned it on. His usual password didn't work. He must have changed it. But why? He never changed his passwords. This wasn't the David I knew. The more I looked, the more questions arose, each one leading to another, forming a labyrinth of uncertainty. The once serene ordinary life I had shared with David now felt like a carefully constructed facade, beneath which something truly terrifying had been brewing. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was living with the ghost of a man I loved, haunted by a message that promised he was alive, and surrounded by people I was now told I couldn't trust. The world had turned upside down, and I felt utterly alone, navigating a maze of lies and secrets. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have dismissed the message as a cruel joke? Would you have confronted David's family, breaking the trust no one rule? Or would you have dug deeper, alone, risking everything to find the truth? I truly need to know, because every decision I made felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. I knew I couldn't confront anyone directly. Trust no one was a terrifying instruction, but it also felt like a warning that could save my life. I decided to start with the most innocuous things, the things that wouldn't raise suspicion. The book. It was an obscure history of espionage. David had always been fascinated by history, but never this particular niche. As I read it, I noticed a subtle pattern. Certain words were underlined, not in pencil, but in a faint, almost invisible ink. I remembered David had a special pen he used for his archival work, one that only showed under UV light. I found it in his desk drawer, a small, unassuming black pen. My hands shook as I turned it on, directing its small UV beam at the underlined words. A series of letters appeared, glowing faintly, strung together to form a fragmented sentence. Meet me, Old Mill, midnight. The Old Mill. There was an abandoned mill about 20 miles out of town, a local landmark, mostly used by teenagers for parties. David and I had explored it once, years ago. Could this be it? Could this be him? The night I went to the mill felt like a scene from a bad thriller movie. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I drove David's old pickup, partly for sentimental reasons, partly because it was less conspicuous than my own car. The mill was desolate, eerily silent except for the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. I parked a good distance away and approached on foot, flashlight in hand, every shadow seeming to twist into a menacing shape. I called out David's name, my voice a shaky whisper. Nothing. Just the wind. I was about to give up, convinced it was another dead end, another cruel trick of my mind, when I heard it. A faint creak from inside the mill. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, dust motes dancing in my flashlight beam. And there, standing in the gloom, was David. My breath caught in my throat. He was thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted, but it was him. My David. He wasn't dead. He was alive. Relief, so overwhelming it almost buckled my knees, washed over me, followed immediately by a surge of furious anger. David? What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice trembling. He raised a hand, stopping me. Amelia, listen to me. We don't have much time. I faked my death. I had to. He explained, his voice low and urgent, that he had stumbled upon something at the museum, something truly dark. He had been archiving an old collection of documents related to a prominent local family, the Ashtons, who were major benefactors of the museum. What he found wasn't just historical records, it was evidence of a sophisticated money laundering operation tied to international crime, stretching back decades, with tentacles reaching into local government and even law enforcement. He had tried to gather more evidence discreetly, but someone found out. His life was threatened, and more importantly, my life was threatened. They knew about me, about us. He couldn't risk them coming after me. So, with the help of a former colleague, a retired intelligence officer who owed him a favor, he orchestrated his own death. The drunk driver was a setup, the totaled car a carefully staged scene, and a body, a Jane Doe from another accident, was swapped out at the morgue, altered to resemble him. The message? He sent it from a burner phone he'd hidden on me weeks before, a last-ditch effort to let me know he was alive, hoping I'd be smart enough to understand the warning. The trust no one was because he genuinely believed there was a mole in every agency, including the police. My head was spinning. Everything he said, as insane as it sounded, somehow made a terrifying kind of sense. The clean accident scene, the changed password, the burner phone, the book on espionage. It all fit. But the pain, the absolute agony I had gone through, the funeral, the endless days of grieving. David, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer like that? I cried, tears finally streaming down my face. He stepped closer, his own eyes filled with anguish. I couldn't, Amelia. If you knew, your reactions, your grief, it wouldn't have been real. And they would have known. They would have come for you. He reached out, his hand brushing my cheek, and the familiar warmth of his touch was almost too much to bear. I hated every second of it. I watched you at the funeral. It killed me. But I had to protect you. And now, we have to expose them. Together.
He had a plan.
He'd been hiding, gathering more evidence, communicating only with his contact, the retired intelligence officer. He needed my help to get access to some specific documents he couldn't retrieve himself from the museum, documents that were in a secure vault only he, as an archivist, could access, but only with specific credentials that were tied to my identity as his widow. It was dangerous, incredibly risky, but the alternative was a life spent looking over my shoulder, or worse, losing him forever. I looked into his eyes, the same kind, intelligent eyes I had fallen in love with, now hardened by fear and determination.
There was no doubt in my mind. I was in.
Over the next few weeks, our lives became a clandestine operation. I went back to the museum, playing the grieving widow, asking for access to David's old office to collect his personal effects. I feigned tears, talked about needing closure. They were sympathetic, gave me free rein. David, using a series of hidden communications, guided me. He'd meticulously planned everything, knowing the museum's layout, security protocols, and the location of the documents. I snuck into the vault late one night, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, using a digital key David had shown me how to bypass. I retrieved a hard drive hidden behind a loose brick David had pointed out to me. Every moment felt like a scene from a movie, but this was my life, and the stakes were terrifyingly real.
We finally had everything.
The hard drive contained irrefutable evidence, ledgers, encrypted emails, voice recordings, all linking the Ashtons and their network to a vast criminal enterprise. David's contact, the retired intelligence officer, took the evidence. He promised to deliver it to the right people, people he could truly trust, outside of the local system.
The wait was agonizing.
We hid in a remote cabin, watching the news, praying for a breakthrough.
And then, it happened.
A series of arrests, high-profile figures, including members of the Ashton family, suddenly implicated in a massive scandal. The news reports were vague about the source of the information, attributing it to an anonymous tip.
But we knew. We had done it. David and I couldn't just resume our old lives. He was still technically dead.
The world believed he was gone. We had to create new identities, new lives, far away from everything we knew. It was painful, leaving our home, our cats, our friends, his parents, Sarah, all of whom still believed him dead and were mourning him. We wrote them letters, explaining as much as we could without jeopardizing their safety, telling them we were safe and would reach out again someday. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, seeing their faces etched in my mind, knowing they grieved a lie we created to protect them. But we were alive, and we were together. We moved to a small town thousands of miles away, started over with new names, new jobs, slowly rebuilding our lives, piece by piece. We eventually adopted 2 new cats, which helped to fill a tiny part of the void. The trauma of what we went through still lingers, a shadow that follows us, but we face it together. Every day is a gift, a second chance we almost didn't get. Looking back, the message at David's funeral was the most terrifying, yet ultimately most hopeful, moment of my life. It changed everything, shattering my world only to rebuild it, stronger and stranger than before. The lesson I learned is that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that sometimes, love means making unimaginable sacrifices. It also taught me that you truly can't trust everyone, and that sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who smile at you while burying you.
So, that's my story. It's a lot to take in, I know.
If you are on my side through all of this, give this video a like. Subscribe for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section.
I'll see you all in the next story.